Before we start today, I gotta let you in on the upcoming Stablecoins Unblocked. It's the premier stablecoin event in the UK and it's happening in London July 1st. BlockTalks listeners get a cool discount by signing up with the link on the show notes. See you there! In the 246th BlockTalks, we speak with Charu Sethi, founder of StableState, to understand the stablecoin regulation landscape in Asia. I'm your host, Mauricio Magaldi, and this is BlockDrops, your weekly digest on blockchain for business. These news are not a form of endorsement, sponsorship, or encouragement for consumption, and are meant for educational purposes only. All right, everybody. I'm here with Charu Sethi, who's going to tell us who she is and what she does with blockchain. Charu, welcome to BlockTalks.
Thank you, Mauricio. Very pleased to be here and finally talking to you after a lot of engagement on LinkedIn. But thank you for having me. So I am right now focused, as you have seen, focused on stablecoins. But let's go back more than a decade, I would say, when I started with IBM, actually 4 years consulting before that as well. But in IBM, I always focused on product marketing and marketing roles. And for about 4 years, I was focused on marketing to APAC financial services, going into market segmentation, account-based marketing, and all of that. And that was the first time, slowly in 2015, 2016, we started to bring in blockchain education to our banking clients. It was just a very basic presentation, blockchain explained. And it was interesting. It was not a dedicated business line, but more of education. And we were thinking of what POCs can be enabled. So those conversations eventually led to me taking up the blockchain marketing role at IBM Asia Pacific in 2016. I did that briefly for about 2 years. Moved on to something else in IBM, but was always eyeing what's happening in the crypto world outside. Was during that time, IBM had banned us from using the word cryptocurrency. We were just talking about, and you would know that, we were talking about distributed ledger technology, and that was it. It's still the same, I would say, it's more pronounced now. But so I left IBM in 2020. I was curious about what's happening in NFTs, what's happening in blockchain. So I joined Engine briefly, and then Unique Network was a layer 1 blockchain focused on NFTs as digital assets. And there was a lot of hype around NFTs back then with CryptoKitties and all of that. But we were more focused on building the infrastructure for the rights management, IP, on-chain provenance of individuals, of content, and then how that interacts with the real world. So more B2B. So I like that idea. We did that for about 5 years. And as you know, TradFi took over this industry, which is also wonderful. And there has been a lot of momentum in that space since then. So I decided to take a break and then start focusing on stablecoins. That was research was sort of a side passion project that I started in my break. And I was just curious, being in ASEAN, how does that impact the fintechs? That was my starting point into diving into knowing more about how stablecoins can be used in the region, especially where there's big focus on making payments more efficient. So that was the starting point, but then it just grows on you. And even though it's still a side thing, I spend a lot more time on it.
I haven't used the term DLT in years, and I think I grew allergic to it, to be frank, because I think it was that period of enterprise blockchain, 16, 17, I think until 2019, until the pandemic actually, was this attempt to pasteurize crypto into something more palatable to the enterprise. Granted, there were no firm regulations. Crypto being a core use case of blockchains, obviously had a lot of to deal with in the sense of the regulatory landscape. And then fast forward to now, we're seeing the rise of enterprise blockchain again, but focused on stablecoins. So if you have seen Tempo and Arc, and Google is doing their own thing, like everyone is trying to become the de facto layer that is stablecoin native, high speed, all that, all the buzzwords. How is this playing out in your side of the world? Because I cover a lot of US, UK, Latin America, and this is because I really like to sleep, and your daytime is not necessarily my daytime. So what does it look like in terms of regulation, adoption, hurdles, scandals, if you will? Like what does it look like? What's the landscape on the on that side of the world? And I've covered a bit of Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, Australia. So that time zone is in my radar, but I'm not too deep into what that looks like. So what is your perspective of everything that's happening around that?
Yeah, this is a very interesting region, Asia, and it's one region, but like as fragmented as it can be in terms of regulation, in terms of languages, in terms of the openness, in terms of development. There are various layers and the countries sit on different parts of the spectrum on every layer. I think being in Singapore, the Monetary Authority of Singapore has been um, very savvy about this almost since the beginning of like 2016, 2017. They started off with the Project Guardian, and now it's Project Plume. That's something that they've tested use cases around tokenization of funds, transfers. They've done a lot of that. And in the region, Singapore is, I would say, most advanced in terms of these use cases and testing these use cases across various banks. And the good thing is that there is always opportunity for banks in the country, for technology providers in the country to participate. So that creates strong proof points of what's possible. There is also Singapore by default creates and be it AI or blockchain, they do provide clear guidance and frameworks as to this is how you can approach. There may or may not be a law, but there is a guidance if you're looking for it. So that's Singapore. When you go up to the countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand, and it's the volumes, right? Singapore is a very small country and it doesn't have the volume play, but the volume and growth sits in these developing countries. And that's where in the last 10 years, we've seen a huge amount of fintech activity, very successful fintechs as well, addressing challenges across e-commerce payments, and that's given Singapore and the region last 10 years of high attention from that perspective. And that's where I started to understand that what does fintech 2.0 look like with blockchain and with stablecoins. So, and I wrote about this. I took Vietnam as an example country to see because there are 33 million users with mobile Vietnam, and they have largely grown on quick customer acquisition through payments, QR codes, right? And they raised significant amount, 200 million in Series A, and they had planned to go IPO at some time, which has not happened yet. They've been trapped in the payments space, which is low margin. And I started to look at the hypotheses that will stablecoins help them monetize their data and the data they have with merchants. And it turns out that stablecoins are not permitted in Vietnam to settle for businesses and merchants, and all domestic transactions have to be settled in domestic currency. So that's where the buck stops for stablecoins right now. But even for them to be profitable, they have not been able to monetize that data. And there are regulations and there is difficulty in implementation because there is pressure to grow the user base. The plan around using dynamic QR codes turned into static QR codes. So there is less data capture and less monetization. So a lot of fintechs were stuck in that kind of paradox, and stablecoins directly don't solve this problem. That was my learning. But at the core of it is the regulation. So at the same time, Vietnam and is now exploring the use of stablecoins, but that's the central bank of Vietnam in a way that they could make payments more efficient. That's again, that doesn't go into the domestic economy yet, but there are sandboxes in Vietnam, in Malaysia, which are exploring in restricted ways on how to use stablecoins. Philippines is a bit more advanced. They have set up remittances through the coins.ph exchange from the Middle East, and they have been more open in terms of doing that. And Thailand as well has set up a sandbox, and in permissioned environments, foreign issued stablecoins are permitted. Singapore is open to foreign issued stablecoins. And so it's a very diverse regulatory landscape. The interesting one here is Hong Kong, which has recently granted 2 licenses for Hong Kong dollar pegged stablecoin.
You started with domestic payments, QR codes, and I'm Brazilian, and I know how Pix in Brazil has had an amazing uptake, and it became a de facto barrier to entry for Brazilian real stables in domestic payments. So you will have a lot of adoption for, I want to say, faster payments or instant payments, call it what you will. And it really doesn't matter from a user perspective which rails these things are happening on, because as long as they can move money quick at a next to zero cost, it will have adoption. And in Brazil, the Central Bank of Brazil resolved this with a centralized, highly regulated, orchestrated payments, instant payments infrastructure, to the point where now that there are regulations for stablecoins, the competition is, why would I take your BRL stable when it doesn't really make a difference between me using Pix and me using something that's potentially more complicated because it's crypto? I know the UX isn't great. What's the real difference? If they're solving the same problem, but one is already established, why would I keep, or why would I pull the new one, which God only knows? There are benefits, of course, but they're not game-changing like Pix was. So you just describe a similar reality across the Southeast Asian countries. Is this the biggest hurdle? Because if they're used to QR code payment, whether they are dynamic or static, but they just solve the problem, what's the incentive to take on something else in that perspective? Because I understand different cultures will accept change in different ways. Is this the biggest hurdle? If it's not, what are the other hurdles?
That is not the biggest hurdle, because the value prop of stablecoins is not to solve domestic payments. And that's, though it looks like the lowest hanging fruit, the simplest thing to start with in terms of adoption and usage and understanding the concept at face value. But I would say that the regulations and I would say also not just the regulations, but the education and awareness level of the regulators is something that may not be a hurdle, but that's something that does not exist at a scale as we would like it to be. And they're also, for the right reasons, protective about their economies, their currency. So that's the other thing that I wouldn't say it's blocking, but this is something that they're trying to figure out. When we say what's the value prop, the value prop is again not domestic payments, because even in the region with the Project Nexus and other projects, there are payment corridors and established that you can use domestic apps like Payla to make payments to other countries, Thailand, and QR codes are compatible across countries. So those problems have good solutions that exist today. But I think, and also not to lose the sight that stablecoins is the funding layer on top of which a lot of future use cases and other use cases are being built. But it starts with bringing that into the system in some way, and payments, cross-border payments, and showing stablecoins showing up in treasuries, for CFOs. Those are the things that it starts the foundation, builds the foundation, and then everything else that we talk about, the on ramp and off ramp to RWAs. So that's where it starts. But how do we get stablecoins in the hands of businesses and people is, I think, sometimes falls under the purview of payments. So that's, I would just say that the other hurdle is also the understanding of, I mean, there are applications now, like there is cost, and there are payment applications that abstract the rails. And I think I read a very interesting post by Victoria Yaraman on LinkedIn that crypto companies and projects are trying to provide payments, lending, what traditional banking was providing, or fintechs are now getting on to on-chain infrastructure. So it's kind of all merging. And maybe 5 years from now, you can't tell the difference between a banking app and an on-chain app, right? So it's all coming together. However, that is not the case right now. And while technology exists, the adoption in countries like Vietnam will take a while. I have, as an example, I analyzed the API documentation of Momo and compared it to that of Stripe. Momo's APIs are more rich than that of Stripe in terms of the kind of data they can capture. Though technology is there, but implementation has been so difficult that they've not been able to monetize that technology. So I think we can keep building infrastructure and tech, but rolling that out to the masses is still not an easy problem to solve in countries like, Vietnam is one that I have analyzed. And it's interesting, but it's also progressive in a way that the central bank has established a fintech hub, a digital assets hub, and they are initiating conversations. They have a way to engage with banks, with technology providers on how do we leverage digital assets. And payments is something that is one of the use cases that they are thinking, though it's not the it's not the best that stablecoins can do, but it's a starting point.
One of the things you mentioned about governments getting involved in all of this, to me, other than providing clear regulatory frameworks, I think there's very little they can add to the construct. They can benefit to the construct, but not add to the construct. And this is me going against CBDCs, because every time a central bank has started, investigating, exploring, doing POCs, and they end up on a centralized system anyway. And that is the opposite of the self-sovereignty that crypto ethos has advocated for and built for over the last 10, 12 years. So that is, to me, a little bit concerning that we keep going back to CBDCs in the context of stablecoins. But I also appreciate that this is money, and money has traditionally been a social, economic, national sovereignty type of device. It is a political device more than anything else because it's a power device. And it's only natural that entities that are natively centralized will try and fend off decentralization as they deal with the incumbency of being the regulator for that sector. In that aspect, across the region, which are the most progressive or ambitious or innovative central banks or financial regulators that you've seen? And what are the best examples you can think of in terms of them fostering adoption, not only for stablecoins, but for crypto and DeFi in general?
At this stage, progress is something I would tag to regulatory clarity of what you can do and what you can't do in the region especially. And I would say that, yes, we've been in this space for a while, and the philosophy of Web3 around self-sovereignty and all those concepts, not the topmost priority for, I would say, traditional banks that they are looking to adopt these technologies, because they are trying their best to do this in a way that's safe for their central bank, safe for their customers, and trying to provide ways for innovation to kind of evolve from there, right? And these use cases to evolve from there. And one of the clearest paths that I've seen so far is in Hong Kong. And this is also very recent, because the Hong Kong Monetary Authority opened a sandbox last year, and for 2 years now, there was conversation around CBDCs, which they've put on back burner right now. They're not taking that forward with priority, and I'll come to that in a little bit. There were 36 players in the sandbox, and two of them received the licenses. The one bank was HSBC and then Standard Chartered. So the license went to Anchor Point, which is an entity formed by Standard Chartered, Animoca Brands, and Hong Kong Telecom. So these are the two banks that are actually printing Hong Kong dollars for the country anyway. So they are the most regulated. They have, in the eyes of HKMA, the best AML and compliance policies. And so they are testing this in a very careful way, which is their starting point. They've not said no to any future licensees will not go to anybody else or any other technology provider, but these two licenses are to the main two banks that have already been printing Hong Kong dollar. There were other players in the race. So Hong Kong does not allow the use of foreign issued stable coins for retail users. They're very clear about that. But those are allowed for corporate investors. So there is tier one. I mean, they've kind of provided, and I created this graphic to just explain this better. There is this, I would say, tier one, which is the two banks that issue stable coins, Hong Kong dollar backed stable coins. And then there is tier two, the VATPs and the exchanges and the platforms that run trading activity or distribution activity. That's sort of the distribution tier. And then third is global applications that are present in Hong Kong, but will still be determined by the regulation, the use of it. So I think this kind of three-tier model calls out very clearly that what can be done and what can't be done. The interesting thing is that the Hong Kong stablecoin cannot right now go into China, but it can leave the country for probably other use cases. They also have very clear regulations on anyone who holds Hong Kong dollar stablecoins has to be verified by the issuer. If the issuer is transferring the stablecoin to a retail holder, then they have to be verified. They very clearly defined the regulations for hosted versus unhosted wallets. So there is unhosted wallets. They don't have any kind of governance on, but if an unhosted wallet interacts with one of these issuers, then they need to be verified. So I think there is a lot of clarity. Yet, and there is no mention of the fact that you can't do DeFi, right? So that has been kind of left unsaid. But again, there are regulations that say that you can't get yield just for holding the stable coin. And, just the way Clarity Act has left DeFi out of very strict regulation. So I would say that Hong Kong is a region that's quite progressive in terms of providing clarity. And they have very strong companies coming up, creating distribution and growth mechanisms. And so that's their. So one of the companies called OSL also offers USD Go, which is a foreign issued stablecoin in Hong Kong, but only to corporate investors. So there is a lot of activity happening that's taking shape, and it's interesting to see that people know what can be done and what can't be done right now, with a scope of things changing in the future as long as operational clarity is established. And the other good part about that is that the Anchor Point license has Animoca Brands in it. And we know Animoca Brands has all the Web3 capabilities and the Web3 mindset. So I'm very excited to see what comes out of that, how they grow the distribution mechanism and the products they will come up with. So that's an interesting thing to watch, I would say.
Wow. So many aspects, right? You have to think about in terms of, I think I've said this before, I would not want to be a regulator in financial services right now, because the amount of different perspectives, geopolitical tensions, frameworks that have been around, proven or unproven. I had our former colleague Keith Bear here as well on the show, and he runs the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance, the CCAF, and they have a digital assets course for regulators.
Okay.
And I was like,
valuable.
Hell yeah, they have to, because it's not
very valuable.
Oh my God, imagine you've been in centralized finance for your entire life, 20, 30 years as a regulator, made up through the ranks. One day you wake up and decentralization is a thing, and now I love that you worded it as printing stable coins, because if you go back to the early days of crypto, it was the separation of money and state. It was the early days of the Bitcoin. And then with that separation means you don't have a printing machine for money. And all of a sudden, the derivative of that conversation is now we're printing money on chain rather than separating money and state. It's becoming increasingly more ingrained, even though the technologies are decentralized. Some are really decentralized, some are to a certain extent. And I live with that conflict myself. That's the wannabe cypherpunk in me has to coexist with the 20 plus year TradFi guy that I am. And that clash is a constant, and it's also a constant reminder that nothing is solved. And we can, still need to work towards a more decentralized, fairer financial system, and more balanced. So I think that's kind of, if I have a conflict, that is the conflict. And I think this the way you word it, and it's probably the way you've been discussing this, is very much, in that arena. So we went through the good, the exemplary stuff. What have you seen in your experience studying, researching, and discussing this with the market? What have you seen that stopped you on your tracks? Like, God, we shouldn't be doing this. This is wrong. This is not what this is supposed to be. Have you seen anything like that? And what type of reflection that imposed to you? Because I've had people on the show say, oh, I've saw this scam or hack or behavior, and that kind of put a dent on my excitement about the industry. It made me reflect whether I'm in the right industry, I'm doing the right thing. What if I'm really successful? Is being successful worse for the world? Was there anything that was so, I wouldn't say dramatic, but eye-opening or soul-shattering that made you reflect on whether you would want to continue in the industry?
I think I would separate that to two different scenarios, right? We've just been talking about traditional finance going into decentralized finance and all of that, and there have been, that's a separate topic. But I think one of the things that stays and will always stay is that this industry started with a much wider value prop beyond banking, and that did really well with the right thinking and the right intention for the creator economy and all of that, right? And I think that seeing all of that fizzle out is something that I often feel that I wish this comes back in a bigger, better way at the right time. So that's something that I feel that I wish. And the second thing is, in our world, in TradFi and DeFi, we've recently seen the Kelp DAO and all of those exploits. And I think there is a reason that, and by the way the whole community responded, the mechanisms it created to fight back with the Unity Fund, with, that's very impressive. That's very impressive. There'll always be questions on whether, we are aligned to the decentralized principles or self-sovereign principles, or, blockchain is the ultimate source of truth. So I think those conversations aside, but I do respect the fact that the current, the existing financial system is there for a reason. It's adequate for the way the system has run so far. But I do feel that those incidents take a dent. And while there are some teams, some banks, some technology companies that will understand, okay, these things happen and the industry has learned to move on. But will be governments and companies and institutions that will take a step back because of this, right? I feel that and I see a lot of that in this region, where they take kind of one step forward, then one step backward. They are kind of at the same place sometimes, but I guess things are getting better. While there have been, the industry has gone through ups and downs, I guess the overall trend is still upwards and it's still progressing. So yeah, I would say that it's all a part of the journey.
How do you keep yourself sane? And I'm assuming I shouldn't, but let's keep it at that. Sane and healthy in an industry that works 24/7.
Good question. Okay, that made me think. Okay, two ways. It's the people I meet, the friends in the industry who I talk to on a regular basis. A lot of us work from home, but here in Singapore, we have organized ourselves into groups. We on purpose we meet and we just chat and we talk about what's happening in the industry, and I think that keeps me sane, meeting people. And of course, just taking a walk by the beach or taking a bike ride along the coastline is something that keeps me refreshed.
And in terms of the industry, what is the one thing that we must fix right now to prevent us from going another 10, 20 years and then realizing we didn't fix that and that didn't move the needle? What is that one thing, in your opinion, and why?
I would say that education at every level, in terms of the end users and the regulators. I think that's something that I see happening really well in some countries and economies, and in others, it's a bit slow. I would say that I would like to see that move at a faster pace, because in the region, I would say we are still talking a lot about payments. We need to move beyond that, because I was referring to the latest BIS report. The use of settlement of stablecoins is payments is a very small percentage of the whole transaction spectrum of on stablecoins. A large part of it's still settlement of DeFi and crypto trading activities and the back transactions. So I would say that I wish we can grow faster, move faster beyond the payments use case. That's where I'm seeing um, in some cases progress, but that too very slow progress. So that's something I wish would change soon in this region, especially when we're already talking. I mean, things are changing so fast from the agentic payment side of things as well. So I guess there's a lot more to be done. We need to move past this first initial hurdle of understanding and creating clarity in regulations.
Yeah, and I'm with you there because it's not about payments. It's about financial freedom. It's about sovereignty. It's about, jobs to be done. It's not a thing or the other thing. It's just finance. That's why I think when people say fintech, in my mind, I go to crypto, I go to blockchain, because there's no other, or just not an alternative technology that's more financialized than crypto. Like, it's the ultra financialization of the internet. And yeah, and don't get me started on agentic payments and all the other stuff, because I think there's a world.
That's a separate discussion.
Yeah, it's on top of, like, you have to establish that this is an acceptable Rails architecture, both in the technology and regulatory sense, to then build on top of it.
Yeah,
Again,
exactly.
in a technological and regulatory sense. And I think that's where agentic payments are coming in. And if the countries and the regulators don't give the same attention to agentic payments or agentic finance that they are giving to crypto, it's going to be even further delayed in terms of that development. And if we can't tell what good looks like in a regulatory sense, then anything goes. And we've seen how damaging agents can be, even in non-financial applications, right? There's cases of entire production databases being deleted by an agent just because, yeah, I did it. I didn't know it. I couldn't. Or I ignored that I didn't, I shouldn't, and I did it anyway. So that's where I think some of these should come. Not that I believe that regulation fixes everything, but giving, as you said, the clarity for people to know what good looks like, I think it's an important aspect of the guardrails, because the industry itself has no incentives to create guardrails for itself.
That's true. And
unfortunately.
Yeah, that's true. And the other part is that as I speak to a lot of startups and companies in this space, there is immense progress from the founder perspective, from the entrepreneur perspective, because people are literally trying to solve the nuts and bolts so that when this becomes a reality, it's easier for organizations to adopt. One of the companies I spoke to, they are building a really cool capability to integrate blockchain and stablecoins into the Oracle payments solution so that treasurers see stablecoins in their everyday workflow. And once they get used to seeing that, then they can do other things on top of it. So the innovation and there are such amazing products being built which are ready to take on to the next wave. And I just feel that we need to get there faster.
I'm with you there. Awesome. For the people who have stayed with us until now, Charu, what would you like them to take away from this conversation?
I would say that this space is moving very fast in most pockets, and it is almost unstoppable. Do not get intimidated by what all is going wrong. I think it's all great progress, and we start using these technologies and making them a part of our day-to-day transactions or conversations. I think I would just encourage everyone to be a part of it.
Awesome. Join us. It's fun on this side. Charu, thank you so much. And hopefully now that we've met online, met on the pod, we'll meet in person at some point.
Hopefully, yes. Soon. Thank you, Tricia.
Thank you so much. Catch us online. We're on Instagram at BlockDrops Podcast, on Twitter at BlockDropsPod or 0x Mauricio. We're on Lens at blockdrops.lens. We have a newsletter on LinkedIn. Write to us at blockdropspodcast@gmail.com, and you can listen to the BlockDrops podcast at Spotify, iColab, Faberbun Tech, and all of the other major streaming platforms. Yay! Shout out to Charu for enlightening us about all things Asia. Don't forget to leave the ratings on your favorite player and check out the merch store at blockdropspodcast.xyz. This is all for today. Stay rare, stay weird. LFJ.